Hey guys, Jesse Vartanian here with Maxon. We're here today to bring you a new tutorial focusing on the 2D designer, animator, compositor within After Effects and really get you familiar with the workflow between Cinema 4D and After Effects. To start, this is really exciting for a new user in Cinema 4D. Maybe you're used to 2D animation, After Effects, compositing workflow kind of thing, and you're interested in using Cinema 4D maybe for the first time, maybe you're just starting out with it. Now I have the final animation that I created open here, and you can see, it looks pretty complicated and complex, visually, but I'm going to show you in this tutorial how, we can create it, and it's really not that complicated, especially, again, for the new user. Now, if I rewind this here, you can see there's a few different sections to this, right? So we have the cube, we have the multiplying effect around it, we have a couple rectangles, a little bit of a camera move, and then of course the footage and the tagline at the end. For the compositors, that's kind of exciting. We get to show you how to integrate something like that into your 3D animation and kind of how the two work well hand in hand. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D. Okay, so now we're in Cinema 4D. The first thing we want to do is just go ahead and drop in a cube. Go ahead and do that there. And you'll notice right away that I'm working in inches. So what you can do is go to Preferences and Units and just change the unit display. I believe by default it's in centimeters, so just make sure you're working in inches because that's what I'm working in. I typically render in octane, which is why I do that, just so my objects and environments are to real-world scale. Again, for the purposes of this tutorial, who's to say, what this fantasy cube would actually be, but we're going to go ahead and change it to 70 all around just to make it a nice even square. And we'll just go ahead and add 1 to that. Okay, next what we want to do is just drop in a camera. We're basically just setting up our scene here. So we can just go up to camera and click that. And we want to activate the camera. So now we're inside the camera. We're viewing the scene through our camera here. And I pulled the focal length back a little bit, so I think it was about 25 there. Basically just widens the field of view so you can see a little bit more of your scene. Gives it a little bit of interesting perspective. And for the coordinates, I'm just going to zero everything out. And I think I basically pulled the camera back by about 400. And if I go into the overhead view here, there we go, I'll just zero everything out. Quick tip, you can basically zero everything out by right-clicking on the arrows, and everything goes right back to 0. And so for the rotation, I have -90. You can see when I do that, we're now actually lined up with the sphere. The cube, sorry. So now we have our camera and our cube. Next thing we need is our floor. So we're going to go ahead and drop in a plane and scale it up. So the shortcut for scale is T. Go ahead and hit T. Just click and drag that out. There we go. And if we go into our different views here, basically what we want to do is just make sure that plane is behind our cube so it's not intersecting. Okay, and we'll just rename this from plane to floor. Drag this up here. And our cube actually needs to be offset a little bit, so we're just going to rotate it 45 degrees just so it gives it that interesting frame up. The essence of our scene is set up now. We have our floor, camera, and our cube. Now we're going to create some of the interesting stuff that goes around the cube. We'll animate it and move on from there. Okay, so now we're going to create this multiplying effect here that goes around the cube. And to do that, we're going to use a cloner object. So let's go ahead and do that. Now to create the actual rectangle, what we're going to do is create a spline here. So we're going to go ahead and click and hold, drag down to rectangle, and you'll see it kind of drops in this rectangle here. We just want to hit R for rotate, Oh, make sure you're out of that. Make sure you're clicked on rectangle, hit R. There we go. I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. And again, this is basically going to act as this object here, right? So if we go into the object here, let's just go ahead and make the width and the height about 140. There we go. So now we have the outside of the rectangle. We'll go ahead and duplicate it. Just click and hit Control, and there we go. We get a duplicate object of it, and make it 5 by 5, and we'll add in a little bit of rounding here, 0.4. So what I'm doing here basically is we're going to take both of these objects and we're going to place it within a sweep NURB. So if you go ahead and click on sweep, and then we can click and drag them both in here. You can see now basically, let me turn this off. This rectangle here is, we'll call it outer, right? So this is basically providing the shape, and then this rectangle here is providing the width, right? So this outer rectangle is going to be this wide and this height here. So if we turn it on, you can see that that's exactly what we have. And I'll turn on the line display so you can kind of see what's going on there a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so now for the fun stuff, we'll go ahead and click sweep, and under MoGraph we can click cloner. There we go, and we're going to drag and drop this under there. And you can see right off the bat we have a count of 3, so it's multiplying this sweep by 3, so you can see 3 different sweeps there. There we go. We're going to change this to 5, and under mode there's quite a few different modes here, including this honeycomb array, which is in the new release. But we're going to use radial. And to start, we're basically going to make it flat, right? So for the start angle, we'll have it 0. We'll leave that alone. For the end angle, we'll make it 0 as well. And you can also see here that's kind of what we have. Now, let's go ahead and make this shape here as well. It's kind of like a mat to a frame, right? So go ahead and make that too. And in order to do that, we're just going to go ahead and drag this sweep out and copy it. So I'm just holding Control again to copy it. And then by selecting outer, we're basically just going to go ahead and scale this in a little bit. Here we go. And for the height and width, we're just going to make that a little bit bigger. There we go. Maybe 13. Okay, that looks good. Now we want these two elements to kind of stick together when we start animating. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and open all this stuff up here, and we're going to drag this. Let's just call this mat, because it kind of looks like a mat to a frame. And we're going to drag this under this piece here. So it's basically like a hierarchy, which is why I'm putting it under this layer here. So when we start to animate the cloner, which I'll just call this frame, everything kind of animates along with it as one unit. All right, let's just start animating this thing. Have some fun here. So my total length is about 400 frames for this total animation. So I'm going to go ahead and change this from 90 to 400, and just drag this timeline out so we can see the full thing here. Now, with my cube selected, I'm basically just going to start adding keyframes here. Just like you would in After Effects, you add keyframes to the timeline here. So I'm going to turn on auto keying, just so anytime we make a change, it's going to automatically apply a key. So to start, I'm going to add a keyframe at 0, because that's kind of where we're starting. I'm going to skip over to frame 40. You can see obviously nothing's animated yet, but at frame 40, I'm just going to go ahead and enter -10, 15, and 19. These are basically just values that I found worked for this animation. There we go. So now if I scroll through, you can start seeing this cube come to life. We're going to go ahead to 90, and we're going to keep altering these values here. So we'll do -35, 45, and -45. Let's go ahead and test that out. Alright, now if we skip ahead to 120, there we go. If you want to go back and forth keyframes by one, you just hit F or G to go forward or backward. So now at 120, we're going to go ahead and keep plugging away. Do -50, 12, and about -90. And you can see I'm just kind of plugging everything in here, and it's automatically keying it for me because I have automatic keying turned on. And let's go ahead and test out this animation. Nice. All right. Got a couple more keyframes here. So at 150, we basically want to change this to -60, -25, and -125. Test that out. Alrighty, and then at 210, we're going to kind of finish this off. 0, -90, -90. We're going to come back to the starting point there. Alright, now let's animate the frame around the cube. So go back to frame 0, and let's put a keyframe next to the start and end angles here. Basically what that does is if we scrub forward, you can kind of see it fanning out there. So we're going to be working with that to get that effect that you saw in the final video. We'll create a keyframe next to all the scale and next to all the rotational values here. And at 0, let's just change this here to -90. And now let's go forward to frame 50 and start plugging in some of the values that I found that worked for this animation. So for the start angle, let's go ahead and type in about 135 and 0. I'm typing in 0 just so that it automatically created that keyframe for us. And under coordinates, we'll update the rotation, do -110, 0, and 40. And now at 120, let's make this -170, 0, and 160. And then also change the angle here. We're going to make this 360 and 360 basically just to flatten this out here. So if I play this back, you can see we're getting that nice effect that we see in the final video here. Perfect. So let's keep going forward with this frame. We have a few more rotational keyframes to plug in to finish this up. So at 150, we're going to make this -180, 0, 245. And also this is here is where we want to start the scale keyframe. So we're going to basically start shrinking the scale of this entire unit starting at frame 150, and we're going to end the scale at about 190, and you'll see why we do that in a second. So let's move ahead to about 190, and let's change the scale down to 0.5. And I do it for all of these just so that it's uniformly scaled down. And let's also change the rotational values at frame 190 to 0, 0, and 360. Basically, we're just trying to level that out there. So if we play this back, alright, so now you see the frame is kind of going back into position. So we're going to go ahead and animate the size of this cube, just so you can see kind of everything in Cinema 4D can be animated, which is great. So instead of animating, the scale of this thing, we'll just animate the actual size of it, which is technically the same thing, but just to kind of show you the versatility of the program. At around frame 120, we'll set a keyframe to make sure it's all at 70 inches. And then at frame 210, we'll change all of this down to 20. And if I kind of scrub through this again, that looks a lot better. Now you'll notice we're getting some intersecting here with our floor. So let's go ahead and push that back in space a little bit so we're not hitting it, and we'll scale it up. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to animate the camera here. So let's go to frame 0, and we'll do a keyframe on the position and the rotation. And if we skip ahead to the end frame, we're going to change this to about 160. You can see we're basically just zooming in, right? If I change the view here, you can see if I click and drag, it does the same thing. I just figured that in the final animation about 160 works pretty well. And at frame 180, I'm actually going to offset the rotation. So we're going to do -90, and we'll leave this at -90 as well. So now basically the rotation stops, but we continue to push in with the camera. We're going to kind of smooth out that rotation so it doesn't feel like we kind of hit a wall there. And to do that, we're going to go into the F-curve timeline here. It's similar to in After Effects when you change the values of the keyframes in there as well. We're just going to kind of add some ease to the camera. So with the camera selected, I'm just going to click and drag and do Command A to kind of select everything. Hit S is going to frame everything up here. There we go. Now you see at this keyframe, this is where the rotation basically stops. And then you see this curve here is where the position continues to push in. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag this just to add a little bit more ease to that rotation so we don't feel like we hit a wall. And I think the position, the curve is fine. But now what I want to do is also ease some of these animations as well for the frame. And I think if we scrub through, I don't think we need one of these keyframes. You can see here, if I frame this up, like these two keyframes here, I don't think we need those anymore. But if I delete those on the timeline, watch what happens. Let's see if I delete it on the timeline, you see it kind of screws up the scale too, because we have a scale keyframe at this position as well, not just rotation. So let's undo that. And what I want to do here is, like, I don't need this keyframe and I don't need this keyframe, but these only pertain to the rotation. So I'm not actually deleting the scale keyframe as well. So now you still see a keyframe there. We're just kind of removing those unnecessary rotational keyframes. So if I play this back, you can see that's a little bit smoother, right? And now I'm just going to go ahead and smooth out this end too. So I'm going to pull this curve back a little bit. And if I play this back, there we go. Let's play the whole thing. Now we're just going to add in those additional rectangles in the foreground. So let's just save ourselves some time and duplicate this sweep that we already created. And I don't need the matte, so we'll go ahead and delete that. And let's put this to about 400. So now if we go to frame 0, we kind of play with this here. You can see that we just pushed this way off camera, right? So about 400 means it's off camera, and we're going to set a keyframe there. And about 150, we want this to go down to 180. There we go. So now it's in frame. So we're basically just animating it, off frame to in frame, and then our camera continues to push, and it pushes so far that we it just organically goes off frame, which is perfect. Now you can, obviously mess around with this, add some more rotation to it, make it a little bit more interesting. What I did was I duplicated this again, and then basically, kind of made it go off frame a little bit more, and you can kind of have some fun with that. But let's just keep moving on for the purpose of this tutorial. I want to kind of show you how I created that stripe texture on the cube, so we're going to do that now. And to create a new material, you can go down here and simply just double click and it's going to create a new material for you, or you can go to create new material or command N, many different options, whichever way you want to do it. I usually just double click, it's the easiest. And now double click to go into the material editor, and this is actually, it's pretty easy to create this material that I created. Under color and texture, we have this drop down here. I'm just going to go down to surfaces and go down to tiles. Now it kind of created this tile pattern for us. If I drag and drop it on the cube, you're going to see it appear on the cube, and it's kind of mapped on there wherever the cube rotates. Obviously we can clean up this animation a little bit more, but again, for the purpose of this tutorial, you guys can kind of do that on your own. So for the material, let's go ahead and click on this here, and we're going to go deeper into the parameters here. So let's just change this. Let's just make it black and white. So kind of change these values here. Make this black. Make this white. Oops. Okay, and we're going to change from squares to lines. There we go. I'll just make this both 0. There we go. Sharpens up the lines a little bit. And there you go. There is our line texture that you see here. And what's great about the viewport in Cinema 4D is, you're seeing the textures in real time, which is great. You're seeing it all mapped in and kind of how it's working before you even have to render anything out, which is great. So that was pretty easy to create that material, and you can see the material tag here on the cube. If you want to mess around with some of the coordinates here, you can kind of change the scale of it, but I think 100 is fine for now. And let's go ahead and just make a couple more materials. We're going to just make a white one. Here we go, under the color, white, and we'll make this one black or gray. That works. Okay, so we can easily just drag and drop the material onto the objects, which is really beneficial. And you can also drag and drop it right in the Objects tab as well. So if we know we want this sweep to be white, go ahead and drag that on. If we want this to be black, there we go. All right, so the matte, do I have that right? Is it backwards? All right, so we technically have the matte being white, so I can switch this around. There we go. So you see the outer edge of the sweep is now black, and the inner matte is white, but we're also getting some intersecting here, as you can see. So let's change the width of this a little bit. The height, sorry. There we go. Perfect. So now we're not actually intersecting into this one. It's actually going through it, and that works out well. There we go. Perfect. And there's always cleanup work in any project, obviously, as you go along. So, you see our plane here not quite going to the edge, so let's just scale that up. And again, you can clean up the animation so it's a little bit smoother, make it a little bit more unique to you, but the technique kind of stays the same. And hopefully you can see by using MoGraph how powerful Cinema 4D really is, and you can create something really complex and interesting in just a matter of minutes. But we're not even done yet, so this is just the 3D portion of it. Now let's go ahead and add some compositing tags so that we can bring this into After Effects and Premiere Pro and start comping it up. So this is kind of where 2D meets 3D. I'm going to show you now how easily and seamless the integration is between Cinema 4D and After Effects. So with this animation that we've already created here, I'm going to start to apply these compositing tags, they're called, to each of the objects so that we get mats for our composite in After Effects. With the cube selected, I'm going to go ahead and hit Tags, Cinema 4D Tags, and I'm going to apply Compositing Tag. And under Object Buffer, I'm going to go ahead and enable Buffer 1. So that means that for this cube, Cinema 4D is also going to spit out a matte during its render process. So we'll be able to kind of isolate this in After Effects, and adjust the any effects that we need to just on this individual layer. So we'll do the same thing for the floor. We'll just copy that down, and instead of 1, we'll make it 2. I mean, you can make this any order that you want. And so for the frame, I'll go ahead and make this object 3. And for this, I'll make this 4. And I'll also add on this texture. Perfect. So in our render settings, which we haven't gone over yet, if you hit this button, Edit Render Settings, you'll notice that we have our Save option and then Multipass, which is basically what we just did here. So let's go ahead and check Multipass. And if you right-click on it, you can go down and select Object Buffer. So you'll see Object Buffer Group Number 1. And if we go to Cube, you'll see that we have Object Buffer Group Number 1. And we did 4 of them, right? We applied 4 different tags. So let's make sure that we apply 4 different object buffers. 3, 4. Okay. Great. And under the output, you can change the dimensions of your workspace, the frames per second, how many, the range of animation that you want to cover. But for this, we'll change this to all frames. 1280, 720 is fine. 30 frames per second. Perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and open up After Effects. I'm working in 2017. And I'm going to go ahead and double click here just to open up our file. And just like that, it's imported. So the Cinema 4D file that we were working with, you can see that it's being recognized in After Effects. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this into a new comp. And there we go. We see our Cinema 4D file animating without any rendering or anything. It's just working in After Effects. And notice that Cineware is applied as an effect automatically, which gives you all these different parameters to work with the file. So, as a 2D user, as an After Effects user, you may have heard of, Cineware by Maxon and had no idea what it was, or, been maybe afraid to use it. But, that's it. It basically does everything for you. All you have to do is drag and drop your Cinema 4D file into After Effects, and it's just an effect that gives you parameters. It does everything itself, and that's it. And I'll go through some of these settings and just kind of show you what's going on. So Live Link by default is turned on. I guess that could be a little confusing where it says disable, but it is enabled by default. So that means if we kind of scrub through the timeline and go back into Cinema 4D, where is it? Scale this down. as we move through our timeline, there we go. As we move through our timeline, it automatically updates anything that we do in each program. So if I go back into After Effects here, kind of scrub through the timeline this way, Cinema 4D updates, and I could do something crazy like delete this cube, go back into After Effects. Notice nothing happens because we do actually have to hit save in order for something like that to translate over. So if I go ahead and save it, boom, it's gone. I can go back in here, undo it. Maybe I want to change the texture, make it black. Save it, jump back into After Effects, and now our cube is black. So that is an amazing workflow, extremely seamless as you can tell. Let me go ahead and undo that, save it, and we'll continue going over the parameters in here. So that's Live Link. You don't really have to do much, just kind of take advantage of that workflow. The renderer, you can see that by default it's on software. There's a pretty new feature, OpenGL, which takes advantage of your OpenGL capabilities in your computer, gives you a quicker render view here. And then there's also a standard draft mode, which gives you a little bit more of a final, and then the actual final render with whatever lighting setups you have and textures and all that good stuff. I'm going to change this back to standard draft. No texture shader, obviously. If you turn that on, your textures will go away. But that's actually only in the OpenGL mode. So if we click that, there we go. We'll just kind of work without textures, save you a little bit of time when you're scrubbing through here. Your camera, you can choose, whether you're going to work with your Cinema 4D camera, or if you want to drop in an After Effects camera in here, you can animate your camera that way as well. But we already animated the camera in Cinema 4D, so we're going to go ahead and utilize that one. So if we go ahead and hit extract, notice the camera has been extracted from our Cinema 4D file. So if we twirl this open, all the keyframes that we animated within Cinema 4D automatically come in to our camera in After Effects, which is perfect if you want to work with any 3D data, if you want to add particle generating system within After Effects, any 3D work that you need the 3D camera data for is already there. So we have our camera in here, which is going to be great for when we add in the footage at the end of the scene pretty soon. But let's go ahead and work with these object buffers that we created. So with the Cinema 4D file selected, we're going to have to change this to either draft or final. So I'm going to change it to draft, which then allows us to start activating the multipass system. So this is going to be our main layer, right? So this is going to be, basically our quote-unquote render. So I'll go ahead and duplicate this, and if I hit define multipasses and add image layers, it's going to automatically give us all of the different multipasses. We did 4, and it's going to give us 4 different layers. So if I isolate each one, you can kind of see there's a rectangle, there's our frame, there's the plane or the floor, and this is our cube. So you can rename these if you want. We know this is our cube, we know this is our floor, this is our frame, and this is, we'll call this outer frame, and we'll call this like just our main render. So now we're going to isolate these layers just like we would in any 2D workflow, After Effects workflow, composite workflow. So we have all 4 of our mats set up. So we're just going to go ahead and duplicate our render here, and we'll do Luma Mat. So if I isolate this, we can now see that we have a complete alpha channel for that, and I'm going to do it for all 4 of these here. There we go. There's our frame. And there's our floor. And there's our cube. Perfect. So you can kind of see each one as we go through. There's our floor. Great. Now we can turn, obviously, these mats off. Would be good. And we'll rename these cube render. Okay, so now we're just a little bit organized. We have all of our mats set up now, which we can control individually now. So if we go ahead and change this to, say, final, we have our final render, and if we just want to isolate, say, this cube here, right, we can go in and apply an effect that only applies to that. So we can change the color of it, maybe amp it up, what have you. Now, we haven't even added any lights or anything into Cinema 4D yet to kind of make this pop, but I just want to show you the workflow between the two programs here. So we have all of this set up. Now what we want to do is go ahead and insert that footage towards the end of the sequence here. Now, I promise there wasn't any tracking involved. It's all done right within Cinema 4D. So in order to insert our footage and have it, kind of track to everything, we need to do one more thing back in Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and open that up. And in Cinema 4D, all right, we're going to select our floor here because basically we're trying to attach the footage to the floor in Z-space, right? So that, as the camera moves, the footage stays locked to the floor. And in order to do that, similar to the compositing tag, we're just going to go up to tags and add external compositing tag. So what this tag does is basically takes all of the parameters of this plane, right? So if we go into coordinates, it's copying all of this, any animation, any keyframes that we have, and it's basically tracking all of our objects for us, or any object that the tag is applied to. So if we go ahead and save this, I'll show you what I mean. We'll jump back into After Effects. And what I need to do is, see, it's automatically updating that we saved. So with the main render selected, I'm just going to go ahead and extract. And now you see it extracted another camera and our floor. So we don't need that camera because we didn't do anything with it. But we do have our floor now, and you see it comes in as a null. So any kind of work that you do in After Effects, obviously you're familiar with nulls. Let's go ahead and change this to a different render. There we go. Okay, so now you can kind of see anywhere we move our timeline, this null is kind of stuck to in 3D space. All right, so let's go ahead and add in that footage courtesy of Adobe Stock. And, from here on out, it's pretty much, if you're a 2D designer, animator, work in After Effects, compositor, this is all pretty much in your wheelhouse, right? So, we created something in 3D, but now we're back in familiar grounds in After Effects where we're basically just doing our thing, compositing what we created from scratch in 3D. So with this floor null selected, I'm just going to go ahead and option click and replace that floor. And there's a few things we need to do here. By default, the opacity is 0. So let's go ahead and change that. And let's go ahead and rotate this to 270. And you see it's a little faded there, right? Because first of all, our display mode is not correct, so we need to change this back to draft in order for these multipass mats to work correctly and we also have our floor turned on. So we actually don't need that. What we can do is use the floor matte and apply it to the footage. And then we can just delete this here. Perfect. So now if we scrub through, we can rotate this a little bit. Wrong way. 90 degrees. There we go. Perfect. Scale it down a little bit. So notice, like I said, there's no tracking involved. Everything, all the parameters are set between the null that we created and the camera. Everything kind of talks to each other and does everything for us. So like I said, now we can start compositing a little bit and try to match that final animation somewhat. So let's just isolate this footage layer here, and I'm just going to double click on this rectangle to create a mask around it, and I'm going to set some keyframes here, and I'll just kind of drag this out. And basically what I'm going to do is just shrink this down. There we go. Because what I want to do is basically mimic this this animation that we have here of the footage kind of opening up. And I just did it simply with a mask. We can do the same thing with the text here too. And I'll just ease these keyframes a little bit. There we go, that looks pretty good. Maybe make it a little bit more dramatic. We can also change this to not the highest resolution. There we go. Alright, looking good. So now if we turn everything back on, you can see this thing kind of starting to take some shape. Okay, so we're going to add in the text now, and to do so, I'm just going to go ahead and click, edit some text, do up next. I'll make it all caps here. I'll make it white, and then I'm just going to turn off, or actually I'm going to isolate the text layer. There we go. Center it up. Okay, now I'm going to add in a solid, and we're going to use this as a matte for the up next, right? So let's bring this down. This is kind of going to act as the line that the up next comes out of. So we're going to change this to, I believe, alpha inverted. There we go. And if we animate the position, so this is kind of where we want it to pop up. And if we just click and drag this down, you'll see that that matte's working perfectly. And we're just going to ease out these keyframes a little bit, so it kind of pops up pretty nicely. Sweet. All right, let's just play that back. Nice. Obviously, you can adjust this accordingly if you want to make it a little bit longer, smoother. There we go. If we turn everything back on, so it's a little high. So what we can do is just kind of push it down a little bit. 1, 2, and we'll push the matte down too. There we go. All right, so I'm going to turn off the footage for a second here, and I want to just add some really quick lighting. I know we didn't go over that in Cinema 4D yet, but for the purposes of the tutorial, I'm just going to add in something really quick. If we add in this physical sky, it's going to give us some nice quick lighting here, and I don't want it to be too yellow, so if I hit custom sky, make it a little bit whiter, and I'll make the shadows not as dark. And under render settings, let's go ahead and just add in global illumination. I'm sure you've heard the term before. It's just going to work really well with the physical sky. And for now, we'll just leave those settings at the default. And let's save this out and jump back into After Effects. And you'll notice here we'll see a difference in the shadows and the lighting. There we go. Yeah, you're starting to see a little bit of some interesting effects here. Let's make this a little bit different color too. This is like I said, the compositing part of it, where you kind of got to play around with different aspects and effects here. So we can throw in an adjustment layer, and yeah, let's do some color balance and make it more of that yellow tone. So we'll do, say, like, what was it, 12, and we'll do like -15 maybe. There we go. And throw in some levels, brighten it up a little bit. There we go. And if we turn this footage back on, maybe change the blending mode. We can also play around with the color of this too. So we could just desaturate it, bump up the lightness there. And again, you just play around with the blending modes and kind of pick something that works for you. So go ahead and, like I said, continue kind of working on this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and render this out, and then we're going to jump into Premiere Pro and render it out for Vimeo at a high quality, so you can kind of see how you can upload, and that'll be it. Alright, so I did a little bit more work in After Effects and then rendered out a high resolution cut, and I'm in Premiere Pro now, and what we want to do is render it out again for, say, Vimeo, something a little bit compressed, so the file size isn't, over a gig, something maybe 50 megabytes or 100 megabytes that people can play, have it load very quickly and maintain a good resolution. So in Premiere Pro, just import your render and then just drag it into a new timeline here. And you can see this render here, everything looks good. If you want to crank up some of the levels or do something additional, we can do that right in Premiere if you've never done it before. We can just type in levels here, drag it on, and then we have the same control just like we did in After Effects. So if there's any additional work that we need to do in Premiere Pro, we're able to do that before we render out. We can also, add in some transitional elements like fades. So I'll just do like a cross dissolve here at the top, and I'll do one at the bottom too. And this is also a great place to start adding audio before you render out for an upload. But we're not going to get into that right now. What we want to do, like I said, is go ahead and set this up for a render. So if we go up to File, down to Export and Media, here we go. Notice the format is QuickTime, and there's a bunch of different options here. If you go to H.264, under the presets, Adobe already has a ton of presets in here, which is perfect for everything that we need. You can go down, if you're uploading to YouTube, you want to do it that way. Vimeo, that's fine too. We actually rendered out at 1280 by 720, so we can click this one here. And you can see the estimated file size is now 13 megabytes, which is absolutely nothing. And it's going to play back really nice with great resolution. So you can also play around with the bit rate here as well. So the more you crank this up, obviously it's going to reflect the file size, but you're going to get a little bit better resolution. They also have options in here like, if you're doing VR video We can also click use maximum render quality and render at maximum depth, which would be good. And you can choose your output here. Go ahead and hit export. And there you go. There's our render ready for Vimeo. I think the original render out of After Effects was about 200 megabytes. This one's 13 megabytes. You can see the compression really holds up well. And that's it. I hope you learned a lot from diving into Cinema 4D and getting a little bit more familiar with the really powerful tools like cloner objects and the integration between Adobe After Effects and Cineware, Cinema 4D. The workflow for a 2D designer, animator, compositor, what have you. And then also compositing within After Effects using the different mats that you can create, and then bringing it into Premiere Pro and getting your file ready for the internet for everybody to see. So please, please, please continue to use these techniques and really make them your own. Like I said in the beginning, with a little bit of coffee and some headphones, I truly believe you can go crazy with this kind of stuff, especially when you get involved with the cloner objects. You can do some of this stuff already with Cinema 4D Lite, which is built into After Effects, but you can also, upgrade to the studio version and you unlock all of these features that we use today. So again, please play around. If you have any questions, let us know, and